one can still say that, look, you may disagree on how to interpret Genesis, but it doesn't mean that you are dehistoricizing the Bible. It's just a matter of how you interpret that. All right, let's talk about the fall of man. Now, the late evangelical and Anglican theologian J.I. Packer. I remember years ago I listened to my wife Debbie found a recording, a lecture of his that talks about evolution, creation, and things like this. It's pretty interesting. I had a chance to talk to Packer about that a few years ago, I think right before his 90th birthday. He doesn't
Hmm.
remember that lecture, although he agreed with it. But in that, to my recollection, he said something to the extent of that Genesis 1 through 11 is a quasi liturgical celebration of the fact of creation and not a bird's eye view of what we would have seen had we been hovering over the chaos of creation. And he went on to say, what about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What about the tree of life? Did these really exist? He says, well, I don't know. Trees were symbols in ancient literature. And what about the serpent, the snake in the garden? He says, I don't know. I really don't know if there really was a serpent. I don't really care. And that really shocked me, because, look, I focus on the New Testament, historical stuff about Jesus. Uh, I, I, I'm not, I don't spend a lot of time in theological matters or especially stuff with the Old Testament. But this came as a shock to me. Here's J.I. Packer, a very conservative
Mhm.
evangelical. He led the charge back in the 70s and 80s on the on forwarding the doctrine of biblical inerrancy and teamed up with Norman Geisler and R.C. Sproul, who are no liberals,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
and to write the definition of the Chicago Statement of Biblical Inerrancy, perhaps the most conservative definition of biblical inerrancy out there. And yet, while he was writing this statement, this definition, and agreeing with Geisler and Sproul on it, he was holding this view.
Yes.
So so he had no hesitation with.
Right. And I
Uh,
think, therefore, Mike, that people who think that biblical inerrancy implies young earth creationism are quite mistaken, entirely wrong. It's a matter of hermeneutics, as you said. What kind of literature is this? And then how should we interpret it? Now, I mentioned that for decades I've been skeptical that we should press these sorts of details for literality. And Packer was one of my guides on this. When I heard Packer, he would describe it as what he called dramatic history.
mm,
These were historical events, but they've been dramatized in a colorful way. Well, I think that's good, but it isn't as technical and as careful as Jacobson's categorization of mytho-history.
mhm.
And so I think they're talking about the same thing, but I think Jacobson has a technically more correct genre analysis of Genesis 1 to 11.
Yeah, that makes sense. And even if someone disagrees with you and Packer and other theologians on this matter, one can still say that, look, you may disagree on how to interpret Genesis, but it doesn't mean that you are dehistoricizing the Bible. It's just a matter of how you interpret that. It doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
have a lower view of Scripture than a person who interprets it in a very literal sense in Genesis. It's just a difference in how you interpret the text. And Packer didn't. He died last year, 2020. He died last year as a very strong evangelical. He hadn't gone down liberalism, so the old,
No,
well, we'll get to it in a moment, but the old claim that you start to do that, you're going down the slippery slope. Well, that certainly didn't apply to Packer. I don't see it
no,
happening to you either.